On average, there are 94 homicides recorded in Mexico every day.
Crime has evolved and everybody has committed one, like loitering,
because you're standing in front of a closed business empty and you're loitering,
polluting, pirating movies, and music. But depending where you live, you can be influenced or become a victim of crime. You could live in Asia, Africa, USA. You can't really escape it. Now Mexico is a great place to visit. They have great food, culture, music, and also sometimes a good community. But not every place is perfect, and one of the main things that prevent people from visiting is the crime. Most notably the cartels and how much they impact Mexico. The cartels and their leaders are people you really shouldn't mess with, and always be cautious with them. I mean, over the years they have advanced in weaponry, such as weapons, guns, armors, and they be looking like special ops in their vehicles too. But with all this being said, they have the power to commit massacres and induce fear into people and other cartels. When they do commit huge massacres, they don't play around, and they don't care who you are. Hello, I am Exotic Horror, and today we are going to be looking at Mexico's biggest massacres. The first one up is the Monterrey casino attack on August 25th, 2011. Members of drug cartels Los Zetas set a casino on fire in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico, killing at least 52 people. Los Zetas is a notorious cartel and one of the most dangerous in Mexico. They use tactics such as beheading, torturing, and etc. In this massacre, their main tactic was arson, and left over a dozen injured and many more trapped, and many of them were women in the casino, including one of them being pregnant. Surveillance footage shows that vehicles had pulled up with armed gunmen, and after they got out, opened fire and doused the entrance with gasoline so they wouldn't escape. This attack was classified as Monterrey's worst attack in Nuevo León. But before the attack, the Los Zetas crew met at a restaurant a few blocks away from the casino, with their leader telling them to carry out their plan. Their reasoning for attacking the casino was because the owner failed to pay an extortion. After that, they went to go pick up some gasoline and then headed to the casino. It was said that the cartel offered the victims to leave, but they couldn't because they were too afraid. When the emergency crew finally decided to smash down the walls of the casino, they found the corpses littered in huge piles inside the restrooms, stairs, and game tables. By the next morning, the Mexican authorities confirmed that 52 people had died, while dozens more were in the hospital. After the attacks on the casino, 3,000 soldiers were sent to Monterrey, Nuevo León, and they ended up catching the 5 perpetrators. The 5 of them confessed to having participated in the crime. Later, more of them were arrested and it totaled up to 26 of them. 2 months later, after the attack, family members of the 52 victims came to the scene of the accident with 53 white wooden crosses with the name of the victims, plus one with the word baby for the unborn child. But what happened in Monterrey will never be forgotten. May they rest in peace. But sometime during that year, in 2011, the Mexican drug war was at its prime, and there were a ton of people that lost lives and cartels were trying to implicate fear in their power to Mexico. But there's one case in San Fernando, Tamaulipas. Tamaulipas is close by Monterrey and Nuevo León, and also where the casino attack was at. But in that year there was a ton of mass murders, and their death tolls were up to 193. Authorities investigating the murders noticed that there was a ton of bus jackings by the Mexican Federal Highway in San Fernando. Later, the 47 victims were killed and buried in mass graves. They were reported missing by suitcases never being claimed. And later, the 193 bodies were found. Reports mentioned that there was a female kidnapping and that the victims were R-worded, and able-bodied male victims were forced to fight with other hostages for their own lives, and they would be given knives, machetes, and other weapons. And those who lived were welcome in the cartel. This massacre had induced so much fear that thousands of people fled San Fernando, and the numbers was at least 10,000, and this caught the attention of the Mexican government. They sent about 650 soldiers over there, and after that they caught about 82 Los Zetas members, and the fact that most of them were under 18 is really sad. Mexican authorities are now certain why Los Zetas decided to abduct people from buses and then torture them, murder, and bury them. They speculate that the Zetas may have forcibly recruited the passengers as foot soldiers for the organization. They say they did it because of fear from the Gulf Cartel, which is one of their rivals, and they suspected that passengers being one of them, they would either pay a $300 toll in order to keep going, but some couldn't, and that's where they met their fate. And there's a conspiracy that the death toll is way much higher than 193. During an investigation with Edgar Huerta Montiel, a Los Zetas high-ranking member, stated that there is at least 600 bodies that were buried and unconfirmed by the authorities, but some say that they don't want to confirm it. Little by little, people started to return to Tamaulipas, but this has permanently scarred the state, and even to this day people are so scared that it might happen again. But that didn't stop people and kids playing in the street and opening up shops in Tamaulipas. But with all due respect, may those victims rest in peace. But this year, not only there was people getting killed, but there were bodies being found in large groups, and these are called mass graves, and these mass graves were found in Durango, Mexico. Durango is a sparsely populated state in northwest Mexico, with terrain marked by forests, desert, and the Sierra Madre, and a good nightlife, and nice people. But during this time, and even maybe so today, the Sinaloa cartel stayed at Durango, and during 2011 and 2012, 340 bodies were found in mass graves around Durango. This could be the doing of the Sinaloa cartel against their rivals, or people who have betrayed the organization, since it is their territory. But mass graves alone can be used as a scare tactic for other cartels, but in 2020 alone, 63,000 mass graves had been found, and about 92,000 people were found in them. There are a ton of mass graves that are too many to talk about them in this video. Surprisingly, this next one was not created by the Mexican cartel, and we have to go back all the way to 1968 in Tlatelolco. It's an area inside Mexico City, and it's pretty well known for its history remains that dates back to the 15th and 16th century. But in 1968, the place was going through drastic changes, and it was at a time of protest and change. Neighbors, students, workers, and families. University students formed a National Strike Council to organize protests and demands to the Mexican government. The one thing that the government didn't really like was that it kept growing because of the Olympic Games at that time. Minister Luis Esquerilla, I'm not sure if I said it right, said to maintain control, and he was starting to lose public order. On October 2, 1968, a large peaceful protest arrived at the plaza for the usual speeches. Keep in mind that they weren't armed, and they wouldn't bring any weapons because it could make them look bad. But the government had had enough, and they sent about 5,000 soldiers and surrounding the building and opened fire to the unarmed civilians. And what is known as the Tlatelolco massacre. The death toll was up to 350 or 400, and thousands injured. Keep in mind there were about 10,000 protesters. Nobody knows who shot the first bullet, but whoever shot the first round, every other soldier joined. There were many protesters saying that all they heard was loud noises, and many people fled. Other articles suggest that the protesters started the conflict, but I highly doubt it, and I'm pretty sure it was the government that started it. After the incident, they launched an investigation on who was responsible for it, and it took almost 30 years. But in 2006, former President Luis Esquerilla was arrested on charges of genocide. However, in March 2009, after a convoluted appeal process, the genocide charges against Esquerilla were dismissed. But the massacre will never be forgotten and will always be an imprint on the state. There have been memorials and also a 40-year anniversary and 50-year anniversary march for the victims, but I'm surprised that this massacre was done by the government and not by the cartel. But the cartel wasn't really advanced at this time, and in the 60s and 70s, they weren't really at their prime, but rather they were really in their prime in the 80s and 90s, but may those victims rest in peace. But these massacres and killings will never be forgotten, and will always be ingrained to the state and to the civilians in Mexico. But this might just get worse and worse over time. But not just for Mexico, as other places deal with high murder rates. But all I can say is that time will tell.